that getting to the numbers on the battlefield, to the equipment, to the drones, to the
Yes.
way that this war goes on. What can you tell us about the situation?
Well, I think the situation for Israel relative to Iran is going to continue to get worse. And there are bunches of reasons for this. I can talk a little bit about the technology issues, and I'd like to do that. It's really not, it's irrelevant in the sense of providing a foundation of understanding to the audience. It's not immediately relevant to the situation of the moment, but it sheds light on it, so it's important to contemplate it. So if we go to the slides, for example, why don't we take slide 2? And for the there's been and this is a very interesting thing. This has been an extraordinary mismanagement by Israel of its air defenses. Let's go to the next slide. I'll show you that. Here's this slide is your PDF. You may want to click on the PDF screen and see if you get. It's not showing clearly. Oh, whatever you got. Okay.
Yeah.
This is a time-lapse photo of Iron Dome interceptors being shot into the air. You can see tens of interceptors. Now, what you see is the camera. This is a photographic camera, and the shutter is open for maybe 10 or 15 seconds. So as the rocket motor drives the interceptor along its trajectory, the rocket motor produces a point of light. If you were doing instant photographs, you'd just see a point of light. But the point of light is moving, so it traces out a line. So the lines you see are the trails of the interceptors as they are rising up, because you had a bright point of light, which is, as it moves, produces a line, which shows you the motion of the interceptor. Now you see these interceptors all are climbing up, and then they're turning downward. They should never turn downward. The only way to have a chance of intercepting a ballistic missile target is to be flying up the expected trajectory. So all of these, at the end of almost all of these lines, you see little points of light. Those points of light are the warheads on the Iron Dome interceptors, relatively small warheads detonating, but there's no target there for them to detonate on. So it's the interceptors flying up and just exploding in the air, probably because the system wants to destroy the interceptor, so you don't get a full interceptor falling to the ground, because the ground damage is lower, still significant. But now, this should never have happened, because those interceptors have no capability against ballistic missiles, but they are very capable against drones and cruise missiles. So this shows that the air defense operations were throwing away interceptors against targets that they had no possibility of hitting, zero chance of hitting. And instead, you could have saved these interceptors for the drone attacks that are now occurring. So this is the kind of mismanagement of the air defenses that I find astonishing. And the reason I say I find it astonishing is because a lot of the people I've known over the decades in Israel are incredibly capable people who've worked on air defenses. I know how smart they are. So I can't understand. I had a discussion with one friend of mine, and he couldn't explain it to me, because he said, I'm not part of the operations these days. But he says, I agree with you. I have no idea. I have no understanding. So they've thrown away these interceptors. And that's a real problem that the Israelis are facing now. The next slide shows the other problem that they should have anticipated but didn't. And this shows you it shows you several frames from a video of one of these Al-Fatah ballistic missiles coming into the atmosphere, arriving at a fantastic speed. The speed of this warhead is probably Mach 10 or 11 or even higher. Now, the reason the speed is so high, if you look carefully, let's look at the upper left inset. You see something to the right of the main that's a reflection off the lens of the camera. That's not real. That's just an artifact of the camera reflection from the bright part of the contrail to the left. But you see the front end of the contrail is very much brighter than the remaining part of the contrail. That's because there's a rocket motor thrusting this warhead forward against the drag of aerodynamic drag, because the warhead would normally slow up, and you'd expect it to slow up to maybe 1.5 or 2 kilometers per second if you do the aerodynamic drag calculation. But the rocket motor keeps the speed high, and so when it hits the ground at Mach 10 or higher. Now, if you look at the last slide to the right, lower, you see the bright flash from the detonation, and you see the sky is blue. And the reason the sky is blue is because the energy at the detonation point is so high that the temperature is higher than you would normally see from an explosion. If you look at most of the explosions on the ground, when you don't have this highly energetic warhead coming in, the color tends to be red or yellow, which indicates a lower temperature at the peak of the explosive energy output. This is higher because you have the kinetic energy of the impact, which contributes as much energy as the equivalent weight of high explosive. So if there were no explosive in this warhead at all, it would have the explosive energy of its weight in TNT, but it also has TNT in it, high explosive. So you have twice the explosive density of what you would have from just TNT or just a kinetic impact. And this causes a much more violent explosion, which causes much more damage at the aim point, at the target point. And when you look at some of the damage areas, unfortunately, I didn't have time to put it into this, you can see the effects of these much more energetic explosives. They are doing tremendous damage to very highly reinforced buildings. But these two effects, which have been going on now for a large part of the war, during the 40 days of this war, have resulted in the depletion of interceptors. So if we look at the next slide, this is distilled from a Royal United Services Institute report that was published at the end of March, so basically a week and a half ago. This is their guess. It's a guess that they made based on their best estimates of interceptors being used up at the rate at which interceptors are currently being used up. You can see that if you look at the last column, they're talking about all of the Iron Dome interceptors being used up by the end of April, well, maybe May. That's not correct, I'm sure. I'm sure that we are nearly at the end of the Iron Dome interceptors being available. And we're nearly at the end of the air-to-air missiles that could be fired from aircraft against drones. So these are the missiles that could be used against drones. The capabilities of intercepting ballistic missiles are near zero no matter what you have left. In other words, the Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 and David slings and THAADs have a very low intercept rate against the ballistic missiles. They've always had an intercept rate that's low. So what you have indicated on, we don't know for sure, but roughly speaking, is you have a depletion of the air defenses against drones and an ongoing inability to shoot down ballistic missiles, but the ballistic missiles are even more difficult to hit and even more damaging when they reach the ground. And they reach the ground at a higher rate of, at a higher efficiency, and the percentage of launched missiles reaching the ground is much higher, not only because the intercept rates are low, but also because the missiles are more reliable. The technical features of them make them more reliable during reentry, so the warheads essentially always detonate, which earlier was not always the case, because the Iranians were firing older missiles where the warheads sometimes tumbled, broke up, and sometimes did not detonate. So the situation we're now facing is summarized in the next slide. And we're now being the Israelis and the Americans. First of all, they've mismanaged their Iron Dome defense system. And that is serious because the Iron Dome has a very high effectiveness shooting down drones. But they've expended most of them, and they will be out of Iron Domes against drones. And the drones are very, very problematic, as I'll explain. The availability of timely and high resolution satellite reconnaissance data is now available from China and Russia for Iran. So the Iranians have information on the location of air defense units, which you try to move around, air defense radars, and thereby this allows them to target those radars with their drones. And we saw a tremendously effective attack on the ballistic missile defense radars in the first 2 days of the war. That was effectuated by the strategic reconnaissance of the Chinese and the Russians that was given to the Iranians. The Iranians very cleverly, and I want to underscore here, Iran's military planning has been superbly well executed. There have been no mistakes that I can find in unlike the Israelis, who I don't expect to make mistakes of the kind they made with their air defenses. I think what happened with their air defenses is they've been lying about the capability of Iron Dome against ballistic missiles, and they became the victims of their own propaganda and just wasted all these interceptors against targets they had no chance of hitting. And now they don't have interceptors to shoot targets that they do have a good chance of hitting. So that was a strategic blunder of a non-minor level. So the Iranians have made no such blunders. So they had these extremely accurate drones, and they were able to use them to destroy these fantastically expensive and small numbers of ballistic missile defense radars that the Americans and Israelis had. In particular, there were 4 THAAD radars. I have a picture of one of them later on in the discussion if we get to it, and a giant radar in Qatar that was critical for the overall defense of Israel against ballistic missiles. And this giant radar was critical because the giant radar could see pretty much everything that was launched from Iran when it was launched, and then tell the smaller, less capable THAAD radars where to look for the incoming ballistic missiles. So these radars could then manage the defensive interceptors, the THAAD and Arrow 1 and Arrow 2 and David Sling interceptors, because the radars operated by those systems were less capable in terms of range and ability to acquire large numbers of incoming warheads. So Iran took that capability away from Israel and the United States literally in the first day of the war, first day or maybe two. That was an amazing accomplishment. I did not expect it. I knew the drones were going to be a problem for the Americans and the Israelis, but I did not expect that the precision in finding targets of great effect. In other words, the satellites gave the Iranians the key data about exact locations of these radars, almost all of which could have been moved except for the big radar in Qatar. And it allowed the Iranians to put drones on these radars. And they did it very quickly. What I don't know, but I'm pretty sure is the case, is how many smaller air defense radars have also been destroyed, because the Iranians have got information about those radars too, but it's not as assured because the radars are smaller, they're harder to locate, but they certainly can be located with some efficiency by the Chinese and the Russian reconnaissance satellites. And those radars are certainly also being destroyed. And you know that has to be the case because the air defenses at the American bases in the Persian Gulf have hardly been operating. You see videos of these drones coming in and no interceptors being fired at them. And some of it may be just simply because the Americans have run out of interceptors, which of course is an incredible oversight on the part of the Americans. And the other part could easily be because the radars to guide these interceptors no longer exist. They've been destroyed or damaged. So the increasing losses of all these air defense radars is going to continue as the war goes on. And as the war goes on, the Iranian drones will have an easier and easier time to damage, to go after critical targets that the Americans and the Israelis have. So the drones don't have as large a warhead as you get with these ballistic missiles. So you might have a 1-ton warhead, whereas on the ballistic missile, whereas you have a 1/10 of a ton warhead on the drone. But you don't need 10 100 kilogram warheads if you have precision. If you want to bring down a building, a 100 kilogram warhead is more than enough if you can place it with meters of accuracy. So the fact that the drones have a smaller warhead does not mean that tremendous damage cannot be inflicted. Plus, of course, the numbers of drones you can bring to bear against targets of interest is enormous. Thousands, tens of thousands of these drones. And we know that the Iranians can continue producing these drones, and they will be unstoppable. So if we look at slide 7, I can begin to tell you how even if they can preserve the radars, it's going to be nearly impossible to stop the drones. So that's another factor. So I'm not only saying that the drones are going to be more capable of doing damage because they have high accuracy, and Iran has data from China and Russia that allows them to find the targets. So they can find the targets and they can hit them. But even when there are some radars that are preserved, the radars will not be able to find the drones because the drones are increasingly able to fly very low. And when they fly very low, they are in what's called the clutter, ground clutter. So, for example, when you talk about AWACS, airborne warning and control systems, aircraft-borne radars, those are going to be only of very limited capability against drones. So they've already destroyed at least one AWACS on the ground, and there will be others probably destroyed as time goes on. But there will be some airborne warning and control system radars operating. Of course, they cannot operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're now, I think, there may be 5 or 6 of these. So you can have them on a 12-hour mission. So you need maybe 3 aircraft to keep 2 on station 24 hours a day because it takes time to refuel and repair the aircraft. So they do have airborne warning and control systems. But if we look at the next slide, we can see why those airborne warning and control systems are of very limited capability. First of all, the Earth is round. And so there are 2 phenomena that are extremely important. If we look to the left, we see a radar, an icon of a radar dish. And the radar is looking straight out, and there's a shadow. The Earth is curved, so there's a shadow region below which the radar cannot see. And that shadow region is many tens of kilometers if the airplane, in fact, it can be potentially 100 kilometers out, because if the airplane is in the air, like a radar control system. But notice there's an area called the clutter zone. And that clutter zone actually extends out for quite a distance and makes it basically not possible to see the drones. And I'm going to explain very briefly what clutter is, because clutter is very important. The clutter hides the drone and makes it, even when the radar has a line of sight to it, not possible to see. So if we go to slide 9, the next slide, if we have an airplane that's flying at a high altitude, basically we can potentially see the targets. And we have a line of sight to the target, even 50 or 100 kilometers away. But that's misleading, because if we go to the next slide, we see what the clutter that we see. Did I do that? No. Okay. The next slide shows the actual radar reflectivity of a drone. If we look at the left corner, we can see the upper left corner shows you the radar cross-section of an insect. That's about 1/1000th of a square meter. The next one shows you the the next one below to the left. Go back, so there you go. If we look to the left and the one in the middle left, there's an icon of a drone to the right. We see the radar cross-section of a drone is 1/100th of a square meter. That's really very small. If you want to get a sense of how small it is, if we look below the drone radar cross-section, the radar cross-section of a bird is comparable. So how do you tell the difference between a bird and a drone? This is a problem. Now, it turns out there is technology for doing this, but the technology is limited in its precision. And so the bottom line is you cannot tell the difference. You cannot see the drone in the clutter. And I'm going to explain what clutter is, just so your audience has a rough sense of this. And the reason this is important is this is basically saying that even with the radar aircraft are not going to contribute to an air defense warning system against these drones. Of course, you're also going to run out of interceptors as well. So even if you have some interceptors, the radar-borne system is not going to be able to guide those interceptors because you still need a radar for the air defense, and those radars are being launched, are being destroyed. So if we go to the next slide, we see an illustration of what clutter is. So you're in an airplane and you're looking down at we're looking down at the surface of the earth, and you illuminate a patch of the surface area of the earth. Now imagine that surface area acts like a perfect mirror. So it's a perfect mirror. In that case, you would see no backscattered reflected signal. So if there were a radar reflection from a drone, you would see that you would get that signal. It would be a very small signal because the radar cross-section is very small, but you would not get a competing signal from the illuminated ground. But instead, think of a flashlight. Imagine you have a flashlight and you're in an open area and you shine the flashlight down on a mirror. At this angle, you would see no reflection from the mirror. So if you saw an insect flying above the mirror, you might actually you'd see the insect above this black surface because you don't see a reflection. But imagine that the surface is made up of trees, or of mountains, or of rolling hills, or of grass, or then you're seeing a big reflected signal because you're illuminating a very large area relative to the area you're illuminating when you're looking at the drone. So the drone is going to get hidden in the clutter, and clutter comes from all kinds of sources. So the big problem is not simply seeing the small radar cross-section target, which is a gigantic problem by itself, but it's also seeing it against the interfering reflected signals from other sources. So if we go to the next slide, we see that there are all kinds of contributions to clutter. You have weather clutter, you have rain, you have ground reflections, you have if you look at in this particular drawing to the right and below, you see an aircraft in a shadowing region, because the shadowing region can be not only caused by the curvature of the earth, it can be caused by objects between the radar, mountains or trees or whatever, and the target you're trying to see. All of that is eliminating your ability to see targets. So if I go to the next two slides, if you see that this slide is just depicting birds and trees and things giving me false signals, interfering signals. If I go to the next slide, I can just see here's a radar target area. So if you look near the radar, there's all kinds of clutter from buildings or trees or whatever. Further out, you can have, if you look in the upper right corner, you can have rain clouds, you can have echoes from buildings, because you might have a set of buildings in some areas that sets up an echo. You can see one is called an urban spike. So when the attack, when the Iranians attacked the Abqaiq oil field in Saudi Arabia, the drones came in. In this case, they were not drones; they were cruise missiles. They came in over buildings. So you have these buildings. So I have this drone, and here's the drone, and it reflects a very small amount of radio signal. And the building is reflecting a tremendous radio signal. So I'm trying to see this drone, it's a small signal from the drone against the radar reflection from the signal. So let me just give you one very simplified idea of how the radar tries to see the drone. So there are these very exotic radio technologies that are used. So if we go to slide 16, we see a depiction of how the radar tries to see. I mean, the signal is tremendously large. So the radar in blue sends a signal out trying to see a low-flying drone. Well, the only thing that makes the drone reflection different from the reflection from the ground is that the drone is moving toward the radar. So the reflected signal shown in green is of a slightly higher frequency than the signal from the ground. So the ground has a tremendous signal. So the process signal shown in red here is the signal where I intentionally mix the signal I'm receiving with the low-flying signal from the target. And what I get is a beat frequency that's depicted here. So if I go to the next slide, I know the frequency of the signal. So for a drone, I know the signal is going to be about 300 hertz. That's going to be the shift in frequency. But the frequency of the radar is a gigahertz, a billion hertz. So I have to have a frequency stability. If the frequency of the radar is moving by a few hundred hertz, then I won't be able to see the 300 hertz frequency, beat frequency. I'll be seeing a beat frequency, but it'll be just from the beat frequencies from my oscillating frequency. So you can see how precise the radar signals, the primary signal has to be controlled. So what I've shown in the next slide are the beat frequencies for 1 and 2 hertz changes in frequency. So if I have a 1 hertz change in the frequency, I get this beat frequency of 1 hertz. It would be 100 hertz in this case. And if it's a 2 hertz, you can see I get twice the beat frequency. And in the next slide, I show that the beat frequencies are the same, even if I use, in this case, I've assumed twice the frequency, but the beat frequencies are the same. So no matter what the frequency of the radar, I get the same beat frequency. The problem is if I use a higher frequency radar, like an X-band radar, which is a typical radar that I want to use for tracking, high precision tracking, then the frequency of the radar is 10 times higher, which means I have to control the base frequency to even 10 times more. So the net result is when I look at the problem of controlling the frequency of the radar and also controlling the frequency changes because it's an airborne radar. So there's a change in the frequency of the ground clutter from the airborne movement. I have methods for controlling that as well. It turns out I just cannot see these low-flying, very low radar cross-section targets. So now I have the problem of drones that can home. So if we look at slide 21, if we look at slide 21, this is actually an American drone, which uses the Iranian design, because the Iranian design is perfect. So Iran can take credit for designing the perfect drone that everybody uses. This is a Shah. I have it incorrectly marked as the Gen 2 version is a Russian drone, which looks as an airframe exactly like the original Iranian design. The Shahed drone is the original Iranian drone. And this is an American design, which uses the same Iranian airframe. So Iran is the inventor of the kamikaze drone that's running havoc with the United States and in Israel now, and leading to Iran being the dominant military power now in this current war. So Iran's dominant military influence is now due to several factors. First of all, Iran has control of the Strait of Hormuz. So Iran has a stranglehold on the economy of the world, and also the American and economies of all the other states in the world, including the American economy. So Iran has been able to preferentially provide oil to countries that it has identified as non-hostile, not necessarily supporting it, but just non-hostile. So Iran has very cleverly thought through the idea, well, we're not going to just stop it for everybody. If you're not hostile to us, we're going to leave it open. And by the way, Iranian oil, even the United States realizes that the Iranian oil is critical for keeping the total world economy from collapsing. So now Iran is selling oil not at the reduced rate of $45 per barrel, because Iranian oil was sanctioned by the United States, but it's now able to sell its oil at $120 a barrel. So Iran is raking in money. I mean, it's almost a comedy that the Americans have now removed the sanctions on Iranian oil. So all of a sudden, the Iranians are getting full price for their oil because of their control of the Strait of Hormuz. And of course, they're able to provide oil to non-hostile states. That's a tremendously favorable situation for Iran in this war. The next situation they have are these ballistic missiles, which are doing tremendously more damage per impact than they could have been doing, than they were doing earlier. And the next problem is Iran has the precision information on the targets. So now some of this precision information could have come from other sources. Let's go back to the slide 22. This is from the original attack in September of 2019 that Iran made against the Abqaiq, Saudi Arabia oil fields. In the bottom of this drawing, I've shown a satellite photograph of one of these oil processing tanks. And notice that what is shown in the satellite photograph are the holes in the oil processing tank that were produced by Iranian cruise missiles hitting those tanks. The precision of those holes is to meters. It's incredible how accurately the Iranian cruise missiles were able to hit these processing tanks. Well, I don't know exactly what specific technology the Iranian used, but I can give you a speculation. If you look at the next slide, what the Iranians could have done is taken a satellite photograph of those tanks. In other words, they didn't have to have help from China or Russia. All they needed was a commercial photograph of those tanks. And in the upper left corner here, what they did is a cross. So the cruise missiles have an image of what they're looking for. Here's the image. It's my hand. And now what I have is the image, and what I do is I cross the image with the image of my hand. I do it electronically. So when I somehow come across, all the light gets passed through. None of the light gets passed through when I'm not lined up properly. So you see these three peaks. This is a simulation I actually did. This is my simulation. It's a guess. And what I've done, if you look to the right, I've show you the peaks of the cross correlation, and then in the bottom image, I show you the peaks of the cross correlation overlaid on the targets. So this could have been done with satellite imagery and cross correlation, which we know the Iranians are well up to the job. So here's an example where it's not a drone being homed necessarily, being homed by what's called first-person guidance. In other words, there's not necessarily a drone operator who is sitting far away receiving a television signal from the drone, guiding the drone into the target. This could simply be a drone that is a robot, and it knows enough to know where to go before it opens its eyes and takes a photograph of what's in front of it and cross correlates that photograph with the target. So you begin to see how problematic these drones can begin to become, because now I have the ability to do real-time homing. In other words, I'll talk about that. I can maybe talk about it in the next, because we're now coming to the end of it. But the conceptually simplest idea is that I have a drone and I'm looking through a television camera, which means that the drone has to be sending a television image back to me. I might be thousands of kilometers away, and then I have to give the drone signals. I don't need to do that in this particular case. So Iran, the indications are, at least to me, that Iran has drones that can do cross correlation with images of the targets, as well as drones that can home directly on signals from television cameras inside the drones. So that's that's a big innovation. Maybe I should stop here, and and I can talk about how they can do it some other time, how Iran is doing this. But the availability of the Starlink system is now making it possible for Iran to use drones to do real-time homing on targets. So what happens? They get an image of the real-time situation. Actually, let's go to slide 33 just for a quick second. Go to slide 33.
Yeah.
So if you look at slide 33, here's the before and after. So I have an image of where these radar domes are. So I can destroy them in two ways. I can have an image of the radar dome and cross-correlate it with the drone as it comes in, as I described earlier. Or I can simply home on the radar drone using a video camera. And the video camera can get its information from a Starlink signal. Let me just show you. Let's go to slide 38, and I'll stop after this. This particular, you see this square on the right. This is a Starlink radio terminal. Let's just go one more slide forward. One more slide. And here you see this little dog, cute little dog next to the Starlink communication system. That Starlink system it weighs only a pound or two. Let's go one more slide. There it is in a box that you can order. Notice the box has instructions for how to use it. You can go out, Nima can go out, and he can order from Amazon for about $250 one of these things, and you'll get it in the mail in a few days. And you can then modify that and put it on your drone. If you know how to utilize the signal, now, then you can send your drone out looking for a target, and you can be using the drone communications through your Starlink satellite communication. Now, let's say I'm the United States. I say, I don't want Nima out there using that drone. Well, how am I supposed to know Nima is out there using the drone? I've just sold them a terminal. The terminal has encrypted communications because that's the way you keep the signals secure for people who want to communicate just normally. So how do I know that it's Nima with his drone flying around looking for something to hit? I have no way of knowing. So I have no way of selectively turning off the drone signal to Nima. All I can do is turn off all the Starlink satellites that are functioning over, let's say, the airbase. But if I do that, then I turn off all the Starlink communications that the airbase is using. So I have a dilemma. So the problem is very serious, the Starlink communication system. So now we see how the modern technologies, navigation technology, GPS, Chinese Baidu system that are widely available. These are very high technology systems, but they're universally available. You don't need to understand the system. You don't need to be able to build it yourself. You just need access to its service. And so you have the service, you have the high precision, real-time satellite imagery from the Russian and Chinese satellites, and you're in business. And you have Russia, who has been attacked using the Americans have attacked Russia via Ukraine by giving Ukraine missiles to attack Russia. And Russia has told the United States, they told the United States when the United States did this, if you do this, we, at some future time, will be giving information to someone else to attack you. All right? You did this in Kursk, and you did this you did this in Russia, and you gave the Ukrainians all this information. You gave them satellite surveillance information. You gave them communication information so the drones could attack our strategic bombers, for example. Okay, you want to play that game? That's fine, because we're going to attack your AWACS. We're going to see that the Iranians know where those AWACS are parked. We're going to see that the Iranians know where the radars are, and we're going to give them that information, and they're going to have the navigation resources that they can just buy commercially, and good luck, you know. And now Iran is benefiting from these services, and so incidentally are China and Russia, because they're in the mode of those countries want They want Iran to prevail. And Iran, I think, will prevail in this. And I think the war is going to get worse and worse and worse for the Americans. And my gravest concern is that as Israel gets into a more and more desperate situation, they might be foolish enough to use nuclear weapons. And the American political decision makers better make sure that Israel understands that they are on their own if they ever use nuclear weapons against anyone. You know, they are absolutely on their own forever, completely. Because I'm concerned that this crazy guy, Netanyahu, who has the mentality, definitely has the mentality that Adolf Hitler had, doesn't do something to bring down Israel along with everybody else. And Adolf Hitler would have brought down Germany. We know we have every reason to believe he would have brought down Germany if he had the ability to do it with nuclear weapons, because he was suicidal. And it would have only taken an intervention of the kind that Albert Speer did. Albert Speer was his architect. He told Albert Speer, who was running the German economy, to destroy Germany. And Speer failed to follow his order because he didn't want Germany complete. Otherwise, Germany would have been destroyed if that order was carried out. So you have to hope that either Netanyahu is not as crazy as he looks, or that people who follow who he would order to do the job will refuse to do the job. And I sincerely hope that the kind of Israelis that I know are in the loop, and they would refuse to do the job because they're smart enough to know that it would be the end of Israel along with a lot of other things. But I don't know how much control has been taken by this man, this lunatic. So anyway, so I'll end there.